Well, good evening. This is the second week of the ESSA Accountability Advisory Team, and this is a re-recording of the Zoom meeting that was held earlier today, Monday, February 20th. The reason for the re-recording is that I had some issues when I rendered the video and it was not viewable. So I'm re-recording this for those of you who have missed it or would like to be able to hear the audio that goes with it. Just a quick reminder, the purpose of the work that we're doing in this advisory team is to gather concrete, actionable input and guidance from stakeholders like you to help inform ESSA planning specific to the state accountability provisions of the statute. And myself, Denise Arola, Tina Smith, Louis Farron, and we also had Ms. Renee Banks on the phone today as well and on the call. And Ms. Tina Smith took roll call. So she was able to gather the participants today, and you can go into the Google folder to see who participated. There's a spreadsheet of the advisory team, and if you go into the Google folder, you can see who was actually on the call. The work for today, for this week, is to provide input from your perspective in terms of the work that you do every day and your opinions regarding how it can be done. And we're trying to ensure multiple and divergent ideas are considered. Again, the norms that we talked about last week are the idea of respecting time, listening well to others, honoring those who aren't able to participate by going out and getting their perspectives and bringing them back to the table, respecting our differences and that we need to assume we all have good intentions here, attending to our own needs, which with a re-recording shouldn't be an issue, and just having good humor about it because the topics are pretty weighty. Under expectations, you should strive to inform, and the survey that we're going to be looking at later in the Zoom is your opportunity to inform us of your thoughts. We're not really here to get consensus or have an idea win out. It's really to get the diversity of ideas so that the decision makers ultimately have as much information to weigh into decision making as possible. The other thing we're here to do is to support a culture of possibility, because what we're trying to build right now is something that needs to be able to evolve or iterate as we go into future years. We want to make sure that we don't leave things unsaid, but we also don't want to perseverate or get stuck on a particular topic. I've been in those situations where I've either been the person that has said, who in the world put this together? Or I've been the person helping put something together and hearing others say that. So this is our opportunity to try and put as much on the table as possible and help all of us in this endeavor. The idea is to leave authority at the door and to accept that while this input is very valuable and it will be heard, not 100% of the ideas go forward, and that's because we ultimately have to come up with one state accountability plan. This is a unique opportunity. It's an opportunity to reflect on and refine our theory of action for an accountability system that advances college and career readiness for all students in Arkansas, and thinking in particular about the context of what does Arkansas want to do with this. And then also it's an opportunity for us to reimagine how we support students and to advance equity, access, and opportunity for all students, especially those who are historically underserved. Some questions you should keep in the back of your mind, particularly as we start to look at the indicators and ways that we can bring the indicators together. Think really about the most important outcomes for the accountability system today. And not just today, but also think about the most important outcomes of the accountability system in 5 years. In the work that our office does with innovation, we often hear the phrase that we are preparing students for a future that we can't even imagine. So we're building an accountability system for today, but we need to think about what it can evolve to in 5 years so that we can support student learning in such a way that they're being prepared for a future that we can't even imagine today. And with that in mind, what parts of the current system are driving the desired outcomes and what do we want to change? And I think most important for me is I like to think about assessment and accountability systems as drivers of desired behaviors. How do we help teachers and leaders, parents and students do the types of things instructionally and in the way of assessment to increase student learning and engagement? and downplay or not downplay, but discourage the types of behaviors that do quick fixes for short-term gain. This is really about long-term student learning and engagement. And how do we create a system that fosters this? Let's first think about indicators, because we're going to talk about indicators and subgroups today, mostly about indicators. And an indicator is something that gives you evidence that certain conditions exist or that certain results have been accomplished. And indicators enable decision makers to assess progress toward the achievement of whatever it is we're intending to get out of our efforts, whether that's outputs, outcomes, goals, objectives. And we always have to think of our indicators as being closely tied to our intended outputs, our intended goals and objectives. We're going to revisit these thoughts as we get into some of the options that are available. I'd also like to frame the idea of indicators within this system that is on this very busy slide. And it's on this busy slide because this is a reference slide. It is not something that you would put up in a room full of, 100 people. This is to try and explain an idea that really is a way to think about indicators. If you think about the overall state system is kind of this undergirding or support for what goes on at the local level. And there are indicators that help the state system know whether or not the system itself is functioning well, whether the system is providing the kinds of support and service and leadership that lead to the outcomes, the goal. And in this case, the goal is in the vision for excellence in education, that all students are actively engaged in college, career, high quality employment, military, whatever it is that they want to do, that they have that opportunity and they're doing it at least within a year after graduation. And that's the state system part of it. Then we think about things that are state required. Under ESSA and under state law, we have certain types of accountability that are required. That's the type of accountability that really helps us to meet federal purposes. It's relevant statewide, and it helps us to gauge the success of federal and state accountability and continuous improvement in terms of the supports that are provided to LEAs and schools. Then there are state reported indicators. Sometimes when you have a state required indicator embedded within an accountability system, it's a hard form of accountability. It's something that adds up to an overall rating in many cases. When something's state reported, we think of it as a softer form of accountability. It's transparent, it's out there, but it doesn't necessarily tie into an overall rating. But it's important because it helps the public, it helps ourselves really gauge our progress. So those are state reported indicators. Then these next two are especially dear to my heart, having done school improvement work in a district in the past. And that is the idea that you would have state-supported, locally reported indicators. Perhaps there's a system that the state is providing that allows districts and schools to access data or to access information, or it's a support that you can gauge your progress on. But you don't want to use it in the overall statewide accountability because it's important to the local picture. So an example might be some of the data that are available on students in the student GPS system. The system provides a very deep look at student level data over time. And that information you don't necessarily want to roll up into a state system, but you want it to be available at the district and school level to support local improvement efforts. And then finally, that the most detailed, deepest frame where I believe that all of the action happens is at the local level in the cycle of inquiry that districts and schools use to drive continuous improvement. This is one of the foundational differences in the ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, compared to No Child Left Behind. This is where there's an expectation that states really focus on supporting districts so that districts can really focus on supporting any struggling schools within their district. Here, indicators are identified based on local questions about improvement And this is where the context gets very specific to whatever those local needs are. And those indicators are vetted locally. They're used for deeper, more contextual information. They're used for designing and implementing and assessing the progress of your local improvement work. It should be close to the work of what adults and students are doing, and it informs the work of learning. So if you think about this from the school and district level out, we've got these local cycles of inquiry that help us to look at data that's close to the work that we're doing. And if that data helps us focus on learning, then that information is information that feeds into those broader indicators at the state-supported, state-reported, and state-required levels. And then there's this picture that the state system really needs to look at and have going. So where do we go from here? Which indicators and for what purpose? We've got two different components: the state accountability system, which is that bigger, broader system where states have to determine long-term goals with measurements of interim progress, and those goals have to help to improve academic achievement, graduation rates, English language learners' progress in acquiring English proficiency. The long-term goals and interim measures of progress are intended to provide transparency about how schools and districts are doing on the required indicators towards achieving those state long-term goals. The indicators are used to annually measure for all students in every subgroup. They must be included, and they must include the required indicators with a state-determined option for the fifth indicator. And then finally, on the state accountability system, you've got the accountability system that's used to annually, meaningfully differentiate schools. And at the very least, you have to use that system to identify schools for comprehensive support and schools for targeted support. So that's on the state accountability side. Also, some of these indicators can be used for reporting rather than summed up into the annual differentiation to identify these schools. On the right-hand side, you see that local cycle of inquiry for driving continuous improvement, where we have state-supported and locally determined indicators that are used in a needs assessment or diagnostic type of way. And this allows schools and districts to go deeper into evaluating the learning opportunities that are available to their students and how well those opportunities are having an impact. The intent is to report locally and use this information diagnostically for improvement purposes. So, for example, if you're looking at social and emotional context of learning, there's research that indicates that there's a component of learning that deals with the social and emotional needs of children and youth and young adults. If we're measuring where we are with that, that's information that at the local level is very useful and can really help to drive the efforts of the adults to support the students. If you were to take that information and slip it over to the state accountability side, you now open it up to sometimes incentivizing unintended consequences, like people wanting to get particular outcomes on the social and emotional learning. And then if that happens, you're no longer getting good information to drive improvement. You're just getting information to put it in a rating in a report. And that doesn't have the long-term impact of improving outcomes for all students. And that's a little bit of what we got into with Bubble Kids, with No Child Left Behind. We focused on the short-term goal of improving the percent proficient and keeping ourselves out of school improvement. And what that did was it shortchanged that long-term learning. We kind of spun our wheels in that area for a while. The idea here is that those things that are reported locally and used for diagnostic and improvement purposes, by reported locally, I mean they're something that a classroom teacher looks up on an internal dashboard, not necessarily something that you post publicly for parents, but something that you're using within the school to help you improve. In some cases, you are reporting some of that information in aggregate with all the confidentiality that's appropriate to help parents understand how you're making progress. But that's done in the context of the state and local accountability systems, and it's intended to help your system become a continuously improving system. So what does the statute say about indicators? Let's take a breath here. And I want to share with you, since we don't have the live recording, there were several comments that were made about indicators at about this time in the Zoom meeting. And one comment was made by Sarah McKenzie that, if in fact we want students to be ready for what happens beyond high school, then we should have indicators beyond just AP that help us to understand whether or not students are prepared for college and career, and that we should have more than one indicator, and those should be aligned, and it should include multiple options. So college and career is more than just advanced placement courses. It could be concurrent credit, it could be industry certification, it could be international baccalaureate. In some states, schools are using internships and high quality internships and apprenticeships as indicators, and the percentage of students within a particular cohort that are accessing those opportunities. So Sarah, thank you earlier for that input. Also, at this point, 2 questions came up regarding the indicators of science and writing, and I'll handle those right here. The statute, the ESSA, tells us that all public schools have to have long-term goals that are established based that we have to have indicators of academic achievement as measured by proficiency required on annual assessments. And at a minimum, we have to do this in math and English language arts. English language arts currently is measured using the ACT Aspire or the MSAA. And in both tests, there are components for reading, English, and writing. And at this point, writing is a component. I understand that there's some proposed legislation that would eliminate the writing component. It's based on some misinformation about the technical quality of the writing portion of the exam. And if you have concerns about that, I really do suggest that you contact Hope Allen. The information regarding the technical quality is readily available, has always been publicly available. And the concerns about writing are really a misuse of scores in ways that they're not intended. So the professionals, the psychometric professionals, would not agree with the type of math that was done to raise concerns among stakeholders about the writing scores. So again, if you have concerns about that, please talk to Hope Allen, the Director of Assessment. So writing at this point is a part of it unless legislated differently. The other question that came up earlier was science. Science at this point has not been included in the accountability ratings, but it is reported. So science has been on the soft accountability side. We are required to report it as well as the percent of students tested in science. At this point, we have an assessment for students in grades 3 through 10 that test science, and the intention right now is for that to continue. I think that's very helpful to you all because you get interim progress on those students, so to speak. We are only required to test in grade bands. The issue we find with the grade bands is that if you're not collecting or paying attention in between, then you're only getting information at 3 different times in a student's span of their time with us. So that is something that I think will continue to be part of the discussion. And if you think science needs to be an indicator, there's going to be an opportunity with the survey where you can indicate that. The other thing a state can do as an indicator at the state's discretion for a public high school is to include student growth as measured by the annual assessments. And then for elementary and secondary schools that are not high schools, states can use a measure of student growth, or they can use another valid and reliable statewide indicator. It has to allow for meaningful differentiation in school performance. So when you hear allows for meaningful differentiation in school performance, that means that the indicator itself has to display certain characteristics. And one of those is it needs to be rather variable. It needs to differ among schools. And one of the favorite secondary indicators from NCLB for elementary was attendance rate. But what we know about attendance rate is it's not very different among schools. It's very narrow in that most schools are right around that 94% attendance rate. There are other ways of looking at attendance, that chronic absenteeism and things such as that you could look at and you can put into the indicator survey that is available following this recording. So for public high schools in the state has to use an indicator for the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate, and states can, at the state's discretion, use an extended year cohort graduation rate. There are links in the week 2 materials that link to the research we did, the modeling we did of a 5- and 6-year cohort, and you'll notice that it does show that schools do benefit from being able to look at not just the 4-year, but also the 5-year. And if you think about the long-term goals that all students will graduate and that they will graduate ready, then an extended year cohort really makes sense from our theory of action and from the idea of what we want for all students in Arkansas. The 4th indicator is English language proficiency, students who are English learners making progress on English language proficiency within a state-determined timeline. This work for this particular indicator is being done by another advisory team, and you're welcome to contact Tricia Kerr with the Department of Education, who is leading that group if you would like to be kept apprised of that. They also have a Google Share folder, and the materials are available to others to peruse. Finally, for all public schools in the state, there needs to be not less than one indicator of school quality or student success, such that it allows for meaningful differentiation in school performance. So there we go again. And it's valid, reliable, comparable, and statewide. In other words, it's the same indicator or indicators used for each grade span. And these are to be determined by the state. Now, the state is to determine it in meaningful consultation with stakeholders. That means you. And that's the purpose of the survey that I'm going to be showing you in just a little bit. That 5th indicator could include things, and it's not limited to things such as student engagement, educator engagement, student access to and completion of advanced coursework, post-secondary readiness, school climate and safety, and any other indicator the state chooses that meets the requirements. There was a requirement on the books that I think was associated with the regulations, and I need to double check on this, but at one point, the 5th indicator had to be disaggregated by all the subgroups. And kind of the way that statute reads, it looks like that still is the case, so that's also something to keep in mind. So let's take a breath. At this point, I think we asked for additional input and had some very good comments that I wish the recording had worked because they were captured. I believe Ashley Daniel had given us some good insight, but I want to take us back to the theory of action. And this is something that was shared by Linda Darling Hammond. I just like the way she puts it. It's a good, broad theory of action. If we focus on what matters for achievement, i.e. student learning, and we require attention to continuous improvement, then education will improve. It seems so simple, and it's so different from NCLB, which was if we pay attention to test scores and we create targets and demand that all students be proficient by a certain timeline, and we sanction schools when they don't meet that timeline, then education will improve. Well, there was a short-term effect, about a 5-year effect, and then we've all been, since that first 5 years, just dealing with the impossible. So we're in a much better situation. Strategies that can help us to focus on what matters, i.e. student learning, are strategies such as encouraging multiple measures and indicators, student success, achievement and growth for one, student engagement, opportunities to learn, our students accessing opportunities, requiring the state and the district to attend to struggling schools, and give those districts the flexibility to use evidence-based interventions, not the old ESSA flexibility requirement of turnaround strategies, not the old NCLB requirement of corrective action and restructuring, but really look at evidence-based interventions. They're out there, there are resources for them, and the school improvement group, their advisory team is working on what needs to be done to support districts in accessing this information to make those kinds of decisions. The theory of action we shared last week was basically that if the department provides a flexible, comprehensive accountability system that uses multiple measures and waits within a continuous cycle of inquiry to incentivize and prioritize the work of districts. Then districts will identify and address the needs within their local systems. Districts will use a cycle of inquiry that integrates state, district, and local data so that they can inform their strategic provision of support and resources. And this will enable continuous improvement for all schools and close achievement gaps within schools and across schools. So that's kind of where we started last week. And that's a little bit deeper dive than Dr. Darling Hammond's dive, but it's specific to Arkansas and our context. And then last week, I'm opening a document that last week we asked for you to go in, and some of us added some more specific pieces. And I encourage you to go and take a look at this and continue to add to this, because we'll be building the text of the ESSA plan from the work that we're doing, and your information is so important. For example, Ashley talked about if mobility were included in graduation rate. If we had a way to look at seniors who show up with only half a year attendance in their senior year, and they're added into the cohort, if there were a way to deal with that a little bit differently, that might really be more aligned with what districts and schools have direct control over. And Ashley's right. There's actually a provision in the law that we'll cover later that gives us some choices about how to deal with students who are partial attenders. Also, we learned a lot through the adjusted cohort graduation rate work this year in modeling a 5-year cohort. We are able to see what is going on with early graduates, what's going on with graduates who take 5 years, 6 years to finish, and of course our 4-year. So these are great theories of action. I had followed that up with, if schools get credit for extended year cohort graduation rate, then schools will be incentivized to recover students who have dropped out of school and ensure these students complete their diplomas. That's a win-win for all of us. If performance and growth data are displayed in a way to help students and parents and teachers understand how their student is growing, then, and whether that growth is leading the student closer to performance targets, then we're going to have more students prepared for college and career readiness. Let's see. If indicators of school performance are meaningful to educators, understandable to stakeholders, and based on metrics that reflect the school impacts, not the external factors, then the accountability indicators will meaningfully differentiate between schools and inform schools and stakeholders about areas of strength and areas of improvement. Yes, that's what we're going for here. And another one here, if the state accountability system values career and technical education and industry certification equally with AP, IB, concurrent credit, then schools will be incentivized to provide multiple pathways to students and not try to do a one-size-fits-all education for everybody. So fantastic. I love it. Cheryl Gall got in and commented, the idea of multiple pathways is crucial to student achievement and graduation rates. So please add to this. Don't feel like this may grow in the 4 weeks that we're working together. And I hope it does, because again, as I mentioned, this will definitely help us to build the text for the ESSA plan. Now, back to our theory of action. Given that theory of action, how will the required indicators be included in the system for annual meaningful differentiation of schools? So we are required as a state to do specific calculations for achievement, growth, graduation rate, English language acquisition progress, and one or more fifth indicators. And we'll have to then figure out how to aggregate or combine those indicators in a meaningful way to differentiate among schools. That is going to include weighting of indicators and decision rules. That's the hard work we have. The other piece to keep in mind is, excuse me. One of the problems with having to re-record this is that I'm recording from home, and I have 2 large dogs that are wonderful watchdogs, but a little obnoxious on a recording when you're trying to have a quiet thing. So we will have to figure out how to combine. Now, the statute says that at a minimum, we have to annually meaningfully differentiate schools such that we have comprehensive and targeted. Every 3 years, we have to identify schools that fit into that bracket, but annually, our differentiation system has to help us to understand whether or not those schools are making progress so that they can be exited from support. So we've got comprehensive support and targeted support. And those are the two required differentiations. But in addition to that, we need to be able to show whether or not schools are making progress in the system. So as you look at the vision for your school or district, which indicators from the ones that we're going to be viewing here would you want to be used for accountability in a summative or overall rating system? Some are required, but others might be helpful to add. And which would be valuable for reporting, informing stakeholders, but not necessarily really helpful to include in an overall rating, and which might be more suited to local needs? Because, for example, certain types of student surveys, if they're done well, if they are vetted to be valid and reliable, and they're collected well, and students are allowed to answer honestly, they can be incredibly helpful at the local level to inform your work. If they become something that's attached to statewide accountability, and people then start to coach children on how to respond to the surveys, then you're not getting useful information. And in fact, you're actually making it more difficult to get the kind of information you need for improvement. So that's something very important to keep in mind, those different levels. Again, think of that frame about state system, state required, state reported, state supported, but locally used, and then locally vetted and used indicators. Then we have to put them together. We have to aggregate them or combine them in some way. And basically, there's 4 ways that we've seen out there: index, goal-based, matrix, and dashboard. I'm sure others are coming up with some fun new ways to do this. Some are combining these in unique ways. But let's dig a little bit deeper into this and see what it can tell us. We've got about 20, 25 minutes left. This is an example of a goal-based system. AYP and ESSA flexibility were goal-based systems with an impossible goal of 100% of students proficient by 2014. Obviously, we didn't make that make that goal. And if you remember AYP and ESSA flexibility, it was a series of decision rules around whether you met the target or didn't meet the target. And you had to add up to meet all the targets in order to stay as a school that was meeting the standard, which was fine in the first 3 to 4 years when the targets were actually realistic for most schools. When the targets started getting up into the 60s and 70s, they became a little aspirational for some of our schools that were trying to get caught up. And then, of course, by the time they got into the 90s and 100, they were aspirational for all but 1 or 2 schools. So this is an example of a goal-based system. Another way to look at it that may not bring you the nightmares if you are remembering those reports is just to simply think about, what is your status relative to the goal? Did you meet the goal? Did you exceed the goal? Did you not meet the goal? Are you getting close to the goal? This is what we mean by a goal-based system. And you could set up goals for all the indicators based on those targets. Again, those targets get to be realistic. They have to be based in data. And there's some great suggestions from some experts about how to do that if you want to go in a goal-based direction. The challenge with a goal-based system is that you have to come up with decision rules about how to combine all the indicator statuses into a decision that somehow differentiates among your schools. And that can be challenging. And that's where, is it okay for them to meet it for this group, but not for that group? Which is why AYP was all about meet it for every group, because those decisions imply that you're leaving somebody behind. So that's a goal-based system. An index system is very much what we did with the 2015 rating system. This is an example of a report that was available to all schools to share with their public about their 2015 school rating. And what this report did was take each of the indicators. Each indicator was worth a certain number of points, had a certain amount of weight within the index, and then you got an overall score, and then that overall score was translated into a rating. In some states like ours last year, or 2015, that was an A through F. In some states, it's a number of stars. In some states, it's something like in need of support, not meeting the standards, approaching the standards. It just depends on the different political climates of the different states, how they go about doing this. So that's an index system. The idea here is indicators are weighted. They're worth a certain number of points, and how those add up allow you to get to a point where you have an overall rating that differentiates among schools. Another way to look at it, this is an example from Delaware, where you can see the weight and you can see the total points that it contributes. In this case, in Delaware, schools earn a total of 500 points. In Arkansas, in 2015, it was 300 points. I took the school rating system and put it into this index type system. I added in some of the ESSA example indicators, like the percent of students in the grade 9 cohort that are earning advanced placement, concurrent credit, international baccalaureate, industry certification by graduation. A lot of different things that you could add in. The bottom line is you end up with a certain number of points. You use those points to differentiate and apply the ratings to the schools. Okay, that's goal-based, that's index. Now we move to matrix. I think matrices are really neat. I like them personally because I'm a very visual person, and I think that they are visually very transparent and they communicate quite a bit. The thing about a matrix is you need to think in at least 2 dimensions. So here you create classifications that put 2 different properties together. So here I have an example of performance, which they've called status in this example, and growth or progress. And you can see that they rate the performance in just 3 areas: below average, average, above average. And then they do the same thing with progress. You could do this with growth. You could do this with graduation rate and growth, or progress on improving their graduation rate. And notice the color coding. In this example, they have used a color coding and they've used words to describe what it means if you're in that cell of the matrix. So if you're above average in performance, but below average in progress, you're only satisfactory. We're not real concerned, although I would be concerned, because I think even above average, you need to be growing. But progress is different. So if this were growth, I would want that to be a little different. And then if you're average on status and below average on progress, then that's a bit of a concern. So you can see how where the 2 different dimensions, where they intersect, you have to make a judgment about this. The hard thing about the matrix is, like goal-based, you have to somehow come up with decision rules to combine them. Now you could, I'm kind of jumping the gun here, but you could use a matrix to identify a category, a classification, and then you could assign points to that classification and use an index to get to the overall rating. That's a way of putting it together. Here's another example of a matrix model for growth, and this is something that California was looking at, may still be doing, where they put the graduation status and they actually put the percentages. So at 95% or more of your students graduated in the 4-year cohort, that's considered very high graduation rate. And if you declined, then we're not too worried about you just yet, according to California. You can assign colors, you can assign classification. What is graphically obvious in a matrix is where you need to be concerned. If your school falls into one of those red quadrants or one of those orange quadrants, you need to be concerned. Again, I love the transparency of this. Again, the challenge is in how do you then go to a rating? So do you say that if a school is red for performance and growth in math, performance and growth in ELA, graduation rate, English language progress, and the 5th indicator, then they're a comprehensive school, they need support? That's kind of the difficult part of the matrix. The final example is a dashboard example, where my best example of this really isn't in education. It's more, my sister is a financial planner and she works for TIAA, which happens to be the retirement group that the university uses. And she's able to pull up my data, and she has a dashboard. And that dashboard has this really neat aspirational piece to it that shows me whether I am on target for having what I need to live at my same level when I retire. Now, I'm not close to retirement, but there is something about when you see that graphic and you realize, ooh, I probably need to set a little bit more aside if I want to catch up to where I need to be so that I can be on time. That's the kind of thing that a multiple measures dashboard can do for you. You have thematically placed graphics that are designed to communicate very clearly whatever concept it is that you're trying to get across. And this is an area where we're actually working with the Innovation Lab Network to get some assistance to work on some graphics so we can bring you some examples as we get closer to seeing what it is as you guys give us feedback through the survey. Okay. Just take a moment. I'm going to take a drink of water. So you can put these things together in different combinations, and this may be where Arkansas can get the most out of the opportunity. An index could be used to create an overall rating that annually differentiates. A dashboard of matrices could help stakeholders understand school growth and progress on each of the indicators. We might be able to do this overall rating piece using an index and then be extremely transparent about the progress of our subgroups relative to all students. I mean, there's just so many different ways that we could put this together to create something powerful and useful. We need to evaluate the indicators and how we combine them in light of the 4 lenses that we discussed last week. Remember, we talked about the lens of equity. When we have competing interests, we want to consider the interests that will best serve Arkansas's most vulnerable students. In terms of alignment, when things are in a competing interest, we want to consider how each will align with state and federal requirements. We want to think about practicality in light of limited resources and the priorities in Arkansas. We also want to think about efficiency, and we want to make sure that we consider the impact so we don't create undue burdens on people, either fiscally or on, the human resources, ourselves, teachers, leaders, the humans that are doing the work. So I will take you out to a Qualtrics survey that is designed to give you tons of information. The good news is I spent over 6 hours putting this thing together, and because of that, it should only take you 30 minutes to read through and rate different options. And I'll show you that in just a few minutes. I want to just talk briefly about subgroups, and then I'll take you to the survey before I shut this down for the day and get it posted. Subgroups for ESSA. We have to include them. We have to disaggregate the indicators by them. We have to use subgroup outcomes on the state system for meaningful differentiation to identify schools for targeted support, TSI schools. And that's based on the subgroup outcomes that are calculated by using the same method that we calculate comprehensive support ratings. So some of these things are intertwined, and I'm sorry if that sounds confusing. I wanted to put that out there. It will make more sense as we delve deeper, and I will keep coming back to this idea so that you can get used to it and you'll see the impacts as we go. There are required subgroups for statewide accountability systems. Those are on the left. Economically disadvantaged, the major racial and ethnic groups. We really don't substantively have the other, we still only have African American, Hispanic, and Caucasian or white. The other groups, although they may be particularly dense in some regions of the state, they statewide are not at that significant number. So if you wanted to include a particular group, I would suggest that you put it in there as a 5th indicator or put it in there as an added subgroup. States can add subgroups, and you'll have an opportunity to suggest that in the survey. We have to look at children with disabilities, and we have to look at English learners. On the reporting side, we've been reporting on all of those groups and migrant. We'll be adding homeless, dependent child of active duty military member, and students in foster care. It may be that you want to add, for example, the schools that are dealing with large percentages of Pacific Islanders. That might be something you want to report about because you might be able to get credit and transparency for making growth or making progress with those students. So these are things to think about. Are there additional subgroups needed in order to ensure equity of opportunity, access, and resources? So if in fact we have this system of accountability to help us annually meaningfully differentiate in order to provide support to districts so that districts can provide support to their schools, then do we have all the subgroups we need to identify the schools that need that support? And the districts have the resources that come with that to help them support their schools. So you may or may not know that a bunch of very specific programs were combined into the Title IV. And they kind of blocked all these programs like the Javits program that pays for some things to do with advanced placement courses. So the gifted and talented group has been suggested by at least one stakeholder at an ESSA steering committee meeting. Are there others? You know, this is where you have an opportunity to give input. So let's take a look at the survey. I'm going to take you into it because I want you, this is a preview. So, oops. This is the preview. I don't want to go into the actual survey. It's live. But let me take you through this very briefly. I've got about 10 minutes, and the 1 hour will be up. So the very first page of the survey is what we call an implied consent form. This is required for us at the university to put forward. It tells you the purpose of the survey, how the survey is given. It will shut down on Saturday, February 25th at 4 p.m. That's important because I need time to pull the results together so I can share them with you in Monday's Zoom. I got to have some time to do that. There are no known risks for you to participate in this, and there's the potential benefit that your input could help steer the work of the committees. And confidentiality, of course, is the huge thing. This is a completely anonymous survey. No identifiable information is collected. Your participation is voluntary. You can end it at any time if you go, oh, you know, I'm not sure. I've had some surveys like that where I get halfway in and I go, you know what? I don't want them to have this information. And I just get the heck out. I have been a recent victim of identity fraud, so that's one of the reasons why I'm a little suspicious. So I want to tell you that the way this survey is set up, no identifying information is being collected. No IP addresses, nothing to associate the responder with who they are or where they are. So all of your responses are anonymous. All the information is confidential. It is combined or aggregated for reporting purposes. We use the same confidentiality N that the state uses. We hope we'll have more than 10 respondents so we can share responses on all of it. We ask you to share this with others because the more people that give input, the better the information for all of us. And finally, by beginning and completing the survey, you indicate that you've given consent for your de-identified data to be used. In other words, whatever you input. So then you hit next and that starts the survey. And what I have here is a way you can rate each of these different options. So the required indicator of achievement, we have several different ways that that achievement can be included either in reporting or in the annual system for differentiation. And what we would like for you to do is rate each of these options and then tell us why you rated it that way. If one of the whys on the right-hand side don't apply, then don't check the box. Now, I learned something from the first Zoom. Here's an example. One option would be that schools earn points based on the percentage of students that are ready or exceeding. And for example, if you had 62% ready or exceeding, then you would get 62 points. Now, this kind of implies use within a index at the very least. So, I think that's okay. I'm pretty good with that. But actually, I think I'm kind of neutral to that because it's, again, just focused on that ready, that proficient cut. And that bothers me because I don't think that supports equity, all students on the achievement continuum, but it is pretty practical. So when you go to click, if you click on the square, it actually doesn't always hit it. If you don't get it in the square you want, click on the words. And it's very efficient. It's a simple calculation. So it's easy to do. At this point, I don't know if that supports alignment. Now, this next one, using weighted performance, like we did in the 2015 school rating system, I think this is pretty good because it supports equity. We're paying attention. Oops, did you see what that happened? If you click the box and it doesn't check it, then click the words to uncheck it. Oh, it's really kind of funny. Just mess with the word in the box until you get it checked. And then once you get the hang of it, it goes much more smoothly. I just had to put a lot of text on a single page. So I think this would be aligned with what we've seen before. I did it again. And is it practical? It's not impractical. Oh, I got to hit 3. I'll undo that one. And efficient, I don't know. I'm just going to leave efficient blank because I really don't know. Goal-based use of achievement. A school met or did not meet an annual target. This is my least favorite because it's the most like NCLB, and I don't think it's very equitable. I don't think it's aligned anymore to where we want to go, where we're paying attention to all kids, not just the kids right around the zone of proficient. I don't think it's practical, personally, because you then have to come up with 50 million decision rules that get convoluted over time. And I don't think it's efficient. So that one gets a low score for me. Matrix-based, you can see where I'm going with this. You may have to mess around a little bit with these. These are going to be a little annoying. But the left-hand side is a frowny face. The right-hand side is the happy face. And we say that up in here. The emojis for rating move from unhappy on the left to happy face on the right. So we have, for every one of these, we also have a place where you can use space to provide other options that we didn't put in this. So again, if you wanted to add an option, I'm going to say this is a test. You do that and you hit next. And the progress bar shows you how you're doing. This one is about graduation rate. Same type of thing. What are your thoughts about these different options? Rate them, click on them, whatever. As you go. And again, you can put in additional ones. Now I want to take you down here. There's a couple of special questions about graduation rate, whether or not you want to use one or both, the 4 only, or the 4 and 5, or you'll see the options. And then here, this gets into student growth. And student growth is kind of tricky. This basically gives options of how to combine it. And then when you click on here, we give you an option that you can input yourself. And then there's this question about student growth models, because we learned that it's not as widespread known as we thought about the student growth model work that's been going on in Arkansas as part of the 2015 school rating and the Teacher Evaluation Advisory Committee. Now the law has changed and we no longer have to use a student growth measure in teacher ratings. So that's wonderful. That's not the purpose of this student growth model, although what we learned in creating student growth models or in vetting various models was invaluable. This gives you 3 options and allows you to enter a 4th. And this is called a ranking item. And you can basically, so I happen to think that the student growth model that controls for student input characteristics, such as poverty, special education status, English learner status, etc. This type of student growth model provides a score that has little to no relationship to things schools can't control. So it's a very fair score. Models include value-added models, longitudinal student growth percentiles, and percentile ranks of the residual. So that's a model that I happen to be really fond of because I think it's a really fair way to assess growth, right? If I am teaching in my old school, then this would be the model I would want, because this means that it doesn't matter if your student was a low performer, a high performer, or anywhere in between. They are going to have growth based on what's expected for them, controlling for all those things that you can't, as a teacher, control. So I'm going to leave that ranked as 1. The student growth model that's connected to whether the student is progressing towards standards. This can be kind of tricky. This type of student growth model can be negatively related to student input characteristics. So what that means is the higher the student poverty in the school, the lower the growth scores tend to be. This is what we had under NCLB, growth towards standard. It told you about the same thing that achievement told you. And so I don't think it adds very much to the story for a school, and it doesn't necessarily set expectations for students that aren't already expectations for performance. So I'm going to move that one down. And all I did there was click and drag. So you drag and drop, and then transition tables, etc. So you get the idea. This is to get a sense of your thinking about growth models. So let's go to the next. Then we get into this very interesting fifth indicator question. So I'm going to scroll and show you that there are all these fifth indicators, possible ones. Nobody's saying they have to be used, but they're on the left. And down at the bottom, you can actually add additional ones. And what you have here are 4 boxes on the right. And this asks that you indicate which indicators are more important to include than others. To do that, if you want to include an indicator, for example, you're going to drag and drop it into the box. So one of the things that I think is really important, just personally, the rate of in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, and expulsions. I think that that is something that applies to any grade span, and that if you're reducing that, then kids are spending more time in school and learning. And this, probably my bias towards this as a fifth indicator, comes from the work I've been doing in innovation, where we're seeing that personalized learning reduces a lot of the needs for discipline and a lot of the discipline issues. And so I think that's really something to incentivize, is for schools to put in restorative justice or positive behavioral supports or personalization that connects kids to learning and keeps them connected to learning and reduces some of the negative behaviors that don't help the student learn. So I'm going to stick that here because it may apply to any grade span. I also think it's important to reduce the disproportionate discipline rates for students with disabilities and minorities, and that applies at any grade span. I'm going to drag and drop. I think that at the 6th through 8th grade level, one of the things that came out with Blue Ribbon nominations this year is that the federal government requires that a middle school that meets all of the other criteria for Blue Ribbon nomination has to offer a foreign language. And what we're finding is when a middle school qualifies on growth, on closing the gaps, they're not offering a foreign language. So wouldn't it be neat to incentivize that as a fifth indicator so that more schools in the middle could qualify to be Blue Ribbon schools? Because right now that's keeping them out, among other things. And then student access, let's see, maybe the percent of students earning career, that can go here. And then, let's see, access ratio of students to counselors, that I think can go at any grade level. Again, and then you can prioritize them by dragging and dropping them here. So you have a really cool opportunity to do a lot of input. And if that's not enough input on the fifth indicator, because I couldn't list everything, right, then you have an opportunity to list more in this next question. And then that takes us almost to the end. These next 2 questions are about combining indicators for accountability. And this gets to those slides about goal-based, index, matrix, and multiple measures. And what this does is it gives you a variety of options that you can rate from unhappy face to happy face and tell us why. And it talks about the goal system, the index system, matrix, multiple measures, and then here a combination. That seems to be my all-time favorite. Because in my ideal, we would have a system that kind of gives us an index for rating, but then we would report multiple measures, dashboard report or matrix report, how our subgroups are doing relative to goals. So we would keep that goal-based piece out of the annual rating, and we would be very transparent about progress on goals by reporting it either via dashboard or matrix. That's just my personal bias. You get to have your personal bias and fill out a survey to include it. So here again, different combinations, and then if we missed one, you can add any of your additional ones. And then finally, the last question is on subgroups, just one. We'll get into subgroups a little bit more meatily, either next meeting or the meeting right after that. So here we are, the final question, and it's, here are the required ones. Do you want to add any? You can write in ones that you want to add. You can indicate if you want gifted and talented. That's really the only one I've heard from other stakeholders. So that was the only one I added, but I gave you 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. I also gave you the option to say none of the above additional subgroups, because some people are really adamant about that. Don't add to it. Let's just stick with what we got. That's enough. And then, of course, you would hit next and finish the survey, and we would thank you for your time and be so appreciative of that data. Again, this is available in, let's see, I'm going to close that. And I am going to get out of Safari and show you. I want to, let's see, show you here in the folder for, let's go home. That's Google Docs. I want to go to my drive. In Google Drive, we have a folder. This recording is going to end shortly, and I'm going to put this recording in the folder because I'm pretty sure I did it right this time. I'm going to click on Shared with Me, and I'm going to find ESSA Accountability. When you open this up, I want to list this. Let's see, if you click on Last Modified, that just did it in reverse order. Okay, here's the week 2 survey link. So when you click on this, it'll take you to the link. You can share it with whomever you want to fill out the survey. Please, as many as you need to. Information about the individuals. This is, again, if you wanted to see who participated, this is available here. The input on theory of action is here. The links I mentioned earlier are here. And then the week 2, here's the PowerPoint that I just went through. I don't know why there's 2 copies, but I will add this Zoom shortly. And I hope that this has been helpful. I ask that you please go out, and if you made it this far, you deserve a lot of credit. Fill out the survey, go to the share folder, find the document that says week 2 link. There it is. There's not much on there. You simply click on the link, and when you click on it, it does a pop-out. You click on the pop-out. Don't say change or remove. When you click on that, it takes you to the actual survey. So now you are good to go. You have everything you need. I really appreciate your time and hope that the survey and the materials that were shared, I recommend printing out the PowerPoint so that you can have it next to you, because we do reference slides in the survey, and that helps you to be jogged in your memory of what we're talking about in the text. And good luck with it. And we look forward to combining all the results and visiting with you next week about what you all had to say in terms of indicators and subgroups. Thank you very much.